Welcome to your ultimate Age of Wonders 4 Tomes of Magic and Research Guide. In this video, I'll take you through just how that research system works, how to build up your knowledge faster, and which Tomes of Magic you should choose. Please sit back, relax, and consider subscribing if you want to join us. Let's jump straight in. After you've completed a spell, it will be time to select a new one, or more appropriately, it'll be time to pick a new tome, these books that are filled with spells in Age of Wonders 4. If you're unfamiliar, there are all kinds of unlocks that you can get out of a Tome of Magic. You can get units that can be trained with money. You can get units that can be summoned in using mana and your casting points. And you can receive a variety of unit enchantment spells, of buffs, of physical spells that you can cast on the map or change the very structure of your race. There's a lot going on inside of these Tomes of Magic, and fundamentally they'll drive every development inside of your empire outside of a few buildings in your capital. So you really need to pay close attention. The tomes are aligned to the affinities, if you're not familiar, and there will be 2 tomes per affinity in each tier, with the exception of tier 5, which is a little bit special. As you can see, you'll also receive those sweet affinity points. Every tome will give you 2 affinity points into its affinity, regardless of the tier level of the tome. To get a little technical with it for just a moment, Tier 1 tomes, those first ones that we were looking at, are always available. You can grab any tome you like. As you move through to Tier 2, the only requirement is that you need to have finished 2 Tier 1 tomes. The same is true for Tier 3, but of course in this case you need to have researched 2 tomes at Tier 2. So essentially you need to have 2 at 1, 2 at 2, and then 2 at Tier 3. As you can see, once you move through to Tier 4, it requires you to actually have specific points inside of one of these affinity categories. So if you want to research the Tier 4 Chaos tome, then you'll need to have 6 affinity points already locked up inside of the Chaos affinity. In other words, 3 Tomes of Magic researched from it beforehand if you didn't pick up any other affinity points during the faction customization screen. Tier 5 tomes work the same way, but this time you need 8 points inside of one affinity category to unlock its Tier 5 tome. These tomes are particularly special, by the way. Not only do you need a lot of affinity points for them, but you're probably limited to but one of them. So take care with your decision points as you move up to those very powerful levels. And as we mentioned at the start of the video, tomes or research can contain anything from spells to units, special buildings or improvements, as well as city structures and siege projects to take the enemy down. Jumping back into the research screen, where it's time for me to select a tome, I'd like to talk a little bit about how this actually works in practice. If you've heard me talk about this before, because I have mentioned it in a previous video, you're welcome to use the time cards below to skip through, but this is a very important step. Upon selecting a tome, I'm given a few decisions. Some of them are more obvious than others. Firstly, I need to research something. We don't get to research every spell that we've unlocked from every tome, however, we have to pick from a limited number of things, 3. I can, if I want to, spend a little bit of mana once off to refresh this, to get 3 different options. It's also showing me some of the default options, like the basic research and the research associated with my culture. There are only around 5 research items that fit into these 2 categories, so generally, they're not a big deal. Of course, the hourglass underneath the research item indicates exactly how many turns it will take me, the Roman numeral indicating the strength of the spell, the skill level of the spell. In this case, by the way, I have a 3 skill level spell available from the start. That's because every culture receives a special spell like this that grants its special cultural ability to all units in your empire, not just those that hail from your culture. It's a slightly different spell in that it's a more powerful one, unlocked early, but you might not have a lot of use for it until you start to pull other non-culturally aligned units into your empire. For the sake of this example, I'm going to unlock the Houndmaster, a great unit that summons a Warhound for me. Very good inside of the Tome of the Horde. We'll get to my tome recommendations shortly, and it's going to take me 3 turns to research it. 1 turn later, and you can see up in the top left of my screen that it's now only going to take 2 turns remaining to complete it, and I've got 99 out of the 200 knowledge or research available to unlock it. This is the resource that will fundamentally drive our unlocks, and if we don't drive our research, our science, our unlocks, we're just gonna fall behind. That's why this is one of the most important things you'll need to understand, and why I'm making a dedicated guide video on tomes and knowledge. Jumping into the city of Arcadia as an example, of course, we can check our knowledge at any point, empire-wide up the top left, or per city. Here, obviously, my main city is driving all of my knowledge production. There are, of course, many ways that we could earn knowledge, including picking up things from the development tree that we'll look at a little bit later in the video, but also primarily driven by our buildings. There are many research buildings. We start small, work our way up to something like this, the Arcane Institute, which will in turn lead through to an academy for even more research, and the Scholars Guild, the highest basic research building that all empires get access to. Some will have access to more. The fundamental thing to note here is that you probably want to build these as fast as you can, balancing out, of course, the other needs of the empire, like gold or production. The other thing to note, of course, is that sweet, sweet boosted function. You really want to make sure that you're using the boosted function, I think, for your knowledge buildings, because knowledge is harder to get than most. Likewise, with our tile improvements, as I expand out from a city, there'll be plenty of opportunities to build farms and quarries, but few opportunities to build on top of more knowledgeable resources, like this one here, for example, where there's a mana node. I would, of course, make a quick note that you don't have to build, say, the mana-specific improvement to farm this node. You just need to build any improvement on the tile and make sure that it's clear of enemies. Some other quick tips for boosting this early. Obviously, you can choose to hurry your production. If you have enough gold left in the empire to do so, I'd highly recommend you do. And in this case, I do. So building this Arcane Institute immediately will send my research up from 72 per turn to 87. The more turns I can have my research higher up, the faster I'll be able to get through everything. You will note, however, that the higher up buildings, like the Academy, do require some of those tile improvements that we talked about earlier, namely the research post. In fact, to get the Scholars Guild, you'll need 2 research posts in your city, so keep that in mind for forward planning, that it's not just the quarries and foresters that the research buildings like to be boosted. You'll also need some research posts. If, like this city has realized, you perhaps come to that realization a little bit late, don't forget that you can always find a tile, click on its improvement, and then move down here to this little cycle button. That will let you replace it with another viable improvement. In this case, I can get my research post online. It'll take 3 turns, but it's important to note that it doesn't hog up the city's production itself. So I can keep on building something in the city while I wait, like, for example, a little bit of extra production, so I can get things online quicker. Both of them will take 3 turns, and then I'll be ready. And thanks to the magic of television, bam, there's my research post 3 turns later, unlocked in this city. And as you can see, of course, it's now providing me with a little bit of extra knowledge as well, another useful way just to tick it up a little bit while my vassals add into it too. And if we jump back into the city, you'll notice, of course, that the Academy is now boosted, and I have the 1 required research post to get it. I've got all of my ducks in a row, making this actually not that much of an expensive investment for me. And in 5 turns' time, my knowledge will be soaring. Of course, you can repeat this across all of your cities in the Empire and quickly build a strong base of knowledge. I've also now completed a spell, which means that I can move through and now research a different skill. In this case, I don't particularly like any of them, so again, I'm going to shuffle, try and find one that I'm looking for. Maybe I'm looking for fire damage on my units. It's only going to take 2 turns. I'll choose that one. Something important to note on this screen, and the final thing that we'll note before I move through to the next section of the video, is the research cycles down the bottom here. This is fundamental to understanding how the system works. The research cycles refers to the number of skills I need to research before I can unlock a new tome. In this case, of course, it's next tome at 3 research cycles. Blaze of the Horde in 2 turns will complete one of those. 2 turns later, the game is now prompting me to select a new piece of arcane research, and now I only need to research 2 more of these to get through. It could be a good idea, for example, for me to choose cheap things in particular if I want to reach through and quickly unlock new tomes. Because of course, again, I don't have to research everything inside of a tome to get a new one, I just have to make it through these research cycles. If you select Show Tome Library, you'll of course be met by a giant wall of tomes down the left-hand side of your screen, ranging from tiers 1 to 5 across the 6 affinities. I have a full tier list video where I broke down every single one, but given how many of them there are, that thing turned into a little bit of a feature-length film. And I don't think, generally, that beginner's guides and videos like this should be the length of a blockbuster film. So in this video, I'm going to provide my quick tips and recommendations for the best tomes in each tier level. Of course, I won't be able to cover every strategy, but I will have some general pieces of advice for you if you're struggling. Let's work our way through the tiers. Starting with tier 1, I think that the Tome of Roots inside of the Nature Affinity is absolutely fantastic. Vine Prison is a very cheap, powerful early spell. It summons 5 units. Granted, they're not particularly strong, but they can immobilize the enemy and, more importantly, distract the enemy. Getting 5 extra units into the battle early is very strong. Having an early healing spell like Healing Roots is great. You can upgrade your blades and arrows with poison, and you have a summoning spell, a great way to summon units anywhere on the map. This is a wonderful pickup for tier 1. Tome of the Horde inside of the Chaos Affinity is another great example of a pretty powerful tome early on. You'll get access to some Chaos Affinity if you're looking to take people down. You'll also get access to the wonderful Houndmaster unit. It's ranged, it summons in a Warhound too. You'll also receive a minor race transformation very early on. This one is Spawnkin, increasing the number of units inside of your formation. Important to note, perhaps some slight drawbacks there, but also granting plus 20% damage. There are lots of great things inside of the tomes. These are my picks for tier 1. However, there are plenty of other good options. Again, I'd like to reiterate that across all of the levels. Tome of Beasts, for example, another fantastic pick early on. And if you're not so interested potentially in nature or chaos, like I've already mentioned, then don't worry. There are other viable options. If I were to give perhaps an honorable shout out in this level, I might look to the Tome of Evocation, for example. My top picks for tier 2 include, inside of the Order Affinity this time, the Tome of the Beacon. The Tome of the Beacon unlocks a skill level 4 unit, a Battle Mage unit for us, of course leaning into the Spirit Bolts thing. We also get this quite interesting beacon that heals units for plus 5 temporary hit points in and around it, as well as giving them morale, and you'll see that those morale boosts and also interactions with your city-states come through inside of the rest of the spells too. Another great pick inside of tier 2 is Tome of Glades, this time of course a Nature Affinity. All of the tomes do provide some special improvements or potentially upgrades as well. I won't touch on them too much, but they can provide some real value. Inside of the Tome of Glades, though, you'll receive a minor race transformation if you want to have the Forest Walk. You'll also receive your first look, potentially, at terraforming in the game, changing the actual map to fit the kind of terrain that you like. In this case, it's forested. More importantly, though, you get access to 2 units, a wonderful ranged unit that you can train, and an Entwined Protector that you can summon. And of course, there are plenty of other good picks in here. This time, again, I'll lean into the Astral Affinity and look at actually both of their tier 2 options, which present some pretty powerful abilities, like, for example, more things that we can conjure in, as well as a variety of fairly powerful and damaging spells. Tier 3, the final tier that we can unlock without needing any prior affinity into the area, presents some very good potential. The Tome of Teleportation, for example, Mass Recall, a very powerful ability to bring your army around the map, and you probably won't have access to teleporters yet, so this could be a real leading advantage for you. Likewise, the Emergency Teleportation to quickly pull a unit and heal it up. There are other options here too, like city structures and units to summon in. The other one I'd like to highlight at tier 3 is the Tome of Great Transformation. This one turns your people into the undead and provides a paradise for them to thrive within. It is, quite interestingly, our earliest opportunity really to grab a major race transformation. turning our units into the undead type, as you can see, changing all of their resistances, or most of their resistances to magic anyway. You'll also be immune to poison, and you get lifesteal. I mean, this is just so good. Units attacks heal it, and repeating attacks do the same. You can grab lifesteal on your units at a fairly early point in the game through this tier 3 tome, as well as a variety of other things that it offers too, including these city spires and all sorts of other stuff. But really the focus here is being able to grab lifesteal and turn your units undead very early on in the piece. My tier 4 recommendations, of course, will rely a little bit on some synergy that you've already brought through, something I can't possibly calculate when I'm making these videos, the decisions that you'll make, but they do matter. Obviously, we need some affinity inside of the tome to even get it in the first place, now that we're at tier 4. My first pick is the Tome of the Golden Realm. This provides a really fantastic unit. This gold golem. This thing is massive. It walks up to walls and stabs down at them like they're crumbs on the ground. You'll also receive actually some fairly decent other benefits too. Buying things is 25% cheaper and can be used 2 times per world. Very powerful if you're building a gold-based economy, which you probably are inside of this gold-touched tome. There's some wonderful synergies to get really rich, and you've got a very powerful unit to back you up. Nature's Wrath is another very powerful tier 4 tome, leading in a little bit into the foresting that we were talking about earlier, but that's not really the focus. The focus for me is the fact that, again, of course, you'll be picking up a very powerful tier 5 mythic unit, the Summoned Horn God. Take note, of course, that the upkeep around these will be quite high. Also, quite an interesting spell here, a buff spell, Awaken Instincts. All of your units will get 15 temporary hit points. They regain all of their action points, and they become berserk for 2 turns, immune to morality effects, and damage penalties from casualties are halved. A very powerful spell inside of a very powerful tome. Of course, almost all of the tier 4 tomes present a fairly high level of power. There are definitely still some ones that I would lean away from a little bit if given the option, but thinking back to my tier list, there were very few that I actually just didn't like at this tier. Most of them are really good. They present some really good options. Even the likes of Astral Mirror, for example, some very powerful effects inside of here that can help you almost win a game with just a hero alone, I'm told, as well as picking up a bunch of vision range that might not seem all that useful early on, but definitely becomes more useful as you move through. There's only one option at tier 5 for each tome, which means that there are actually far fewer things to choose from, right? There are only 6. And you can only have access to 1 tier 5 tome. So you need to choose this carefully if you make it this far through the game, assuming. You'll also, of course, need 8 affinity into the appropriate area. And the Tome of Eternal Lord is a brilliant one. In fact, I actually think that almost all of them are. I'd probably say the Materium one is potentially the worst. And inside a lot of them, like one of my picks here, Tome of the God Emperor, you receive just this almighty powerful spell that'll generally bring all of your army back or heal them all up, or just do something that could completely change a battle. Take a losing fight and turn it into a winning one. Here we have Mass Revive. It targets all friendly dead units with Faithful or Zeal, which most of yours will probably have by this point, and they'll all come back to life with half of their total hit points. And of course, this is backed up generally by a whole load of spells. All of these are. I think that God Emperor is a great pick. Or perhaps the Goddess of Nature, and inside of these top tier tomes, you don't get a lot of spells. Here we only get 3, again receiving a kind of mass revive ability. In this case, Mass Rejuvenation heals all friendly units by 40 temporary hit points, nice, and brings back all of your animals and plants to 50% of their health. These tier 5 tomes are game-changing tomes for the battle, incredibly strong. Choose wisely, but don't fret too much. You're probably best to lean into your existing strength here. Speaking of leaning into your strengths, that reminds me that one of the key things to know in this last section of the video is that as we're choosing our tomes, they're feeding through into these development points. And if you missed my recent tutorial video where I talked exactly how this works, let me give you the quick and dirty version. As we choose a tome, it adds income to each affinity. Income per turn of that affinity. Let's take Chaos here, for example. I have currently 2 Chaos Affinity, as I can see up in the top right of my screen, thanks to the tome that I chose, and that's providing 2 income here per turn. 2 per turn, slowly ticking up as I reach the next unlock. In this case, I need 20 in total, and it's going to take me 4 more turns, gaining 2 a turn until I'll be able to unlock this. I'll then, of course, need to spend the appropriate amount of Imperium to grab the ability. This is one of the key ways that your Tomes of Magic will feed into the development of your empire. So it's not just the spells that you're selecting, but you're also choosing which branch of the tree you'd like to focus down, or which branches of the tree. Choosing quite a few of the ones that I've selected, which have tended to be nature, will, for example, pump more income into this tree, and I'll be able to get access to some of these abilities a little earlier on. You'll also find ways to generate more knowledge using this tree, so it can feed back into your research. There are a few things hidden throughout the tree, but generally, as a rule of thumb, you probably want to be looking to the top 2 branches to try and find things that'll give you extra knowledge. This isn't always true. There are ways to get it from interacting with city-states, etc., but as a general rule of thumb, honestly, probably not a bad one to follow. And as one final thing to keep an eye on, here I'm engaging with Gloom Hooknail, and I'm just taking note that they are also picking up affinities, and that some of these affinities are opposite to others. In fact, they all have a natural pairing. You can see here that Chaos Affinity is opposed to Order, and so empires who have a lot of chaos will be opposed to those with a lot of order, whether they're free cities or enemies. In this case, Gloom might not be so hot on me. Gloom has a lot of focus on the Shadow Affinity, the realm of death and decay, whereas I'm more into nature, actually, plants and animals, and that will have a negative impact on our relationship moving forward, potentially leading to war. Here you can see clashing affinities, nature and shadow, applying a -100 to this. To be fair, we've got a bit of work to do, but nonetheless, something to work around and plan in the back of your mind on who might be a better ally than others. For example, Miss Greyblood here might be a much better pick for me. And that concludes my guide on research, everything from spells to research cycles and tomes, how to build up your knowledge, which tomes you might want to choose, and how those affinities relate to the rest of the game. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive and focused guide. Let me know if there are other topics you'd like me to cover. I'm happy to jump in and cover more. And thank you so much for the support during this Age of Wonders launch and post-launch period. It's been fantastic to see so many new faces here at the channel. I'll see you next time.